Hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven, and we are joined today. Our guest is Melanie Pump. She is an accomplished CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and business leader. She describes herself as a survivor, a business leader, and a deep believer in the power of positive, supportive work environments. Her journey, as she says, is not typical. As we'll hear about today, I think you'll hear more about that from Melanie. But she is the author of the recently released book titled Detox, Managing Insecurity in the Workplace. So Melanie, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
And you are joining us from a little bit north of the border in Toronto, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. In sunny Toronto today.
It is sunny Toronto. That's great. I look forward to, now that the border is opening up again. I love Toronto. I love being in Ontario. So hopefully there'll be opportunities to come back, or for you to come back in the US if you do any work here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. So we have a lot to talk about today, including topics from the book, but we're going to start off. Melanie, looking back at the things you've done, what is your favorite mistake?
Yeah. So my favorite mistake, it's something it's only recently realized has been a mistake. And that was, through most of my career, I actually hid a big part of myself. Like I hid the journey that I'd been on and what actually made me different from my peers. Because I didn't come into the work environment with an education. I was actually a high school dropout. And I thought that I needed to hide that. And that was something that I needed to feel shame over. And then recently, over the past year in writing my book and in going on the journey, I've now started speaking about that. And I've realized that I actually, I left some power. I ignored something that I had that was actually a strength, and my ability to overcome that. And also what it allowed me to connect with people once they hear your story and they start telling you their story too. So, looking back on it now, I really wish that I'd been more open and authentic about my journey earlier on.
And so what sort of reaction, I think it's interesting that like you said, you've just recently discovered this. So what sort of reaction then do you get from people when you tell a little bit more about your story and your background?
Yeah, the reaction is always supportive. For one, everybody likes to see somebody who has gone through challenges and overcome them and succeeded. So there's that, of course, which is great, to feel supportive and to feel welcomed by everybody. But then I also have people coming and telling me about their own journeys, because now that I'm sort of exposing my background, people are opening up about their own, and then that's creating a different connection, and I think even freeing for them as well. So I feel like in being open now, it's actually helping me, because I now feel more confident because I'm not hiding part of myself, but it's also helping other people too.
And, there's a word people use increasingly, even in business settings, there's a word vulnerability, that
Right.
leaders, when they show vulnerability, that can be helpful in terms of creating a healthy culture. What are some of your thoughts on that?
I agree with that, because if you have a leader who is acting like they're perfect and not letting any of their weaknesses out, or not let it know that they're going through a hard time, it makes it a lot more difficult to connect with that person and also to trust them. Because even though we can appear as if we're perfect, we all know that none of us are. So if somebody is putting on a facade, it makes it difficult, because then how do you know exactly what they're being honest about and what they're not being honest about? So having that level of openness, I think just it also makes people more likely to follow you, because they know that they can trust you.
And I think one example of that vulnerability is leaders being willing to admit they've made a mistake. That's something we talk about a lot here on the podcast. Can you, is that something that you've practiced in terms of trying to help create a positive work environment?
Absolutely. I advocate strongly for that. I actually have a section in my book on that, about we need an environment where people feel comfortable making mistakes, because how do you learn and grow if you don't make mistakes? And how do you even innovate? Because we all know, it's very rare to come up with a great product idea the very first time. You have to try different things. And even in your mistakes, sometimes you come upon, there's been products that have been created just by somebody making a mistake. I think the sticky note came about that way, actually. It wasn't even intentional. So no, I advocate strongly for that, because the other thing is that people do make mistakes, and you want them to tell you, because then the company can, for one thing, fix it if it was something that caused a problem, but then also change a process or make sure that it doesn't happen again. So we absolutely need workplaces where people feel comfortable saying when something's gone wrong.
Yeah. And you're right. Sometimes there's a messy innovation process where people are trying to do it. When we're trying to do something new, even if we're not inventing a product. I mean, as a chief financial officer, though, you have to be mindful. We don't want "quote unquote" creative accounting. That can get people in a lot of trouble.
Absolutely not. And that's funny. I've had that very conversation many times. Like, yeah, there's different types of areas, right? So accounting is very black and white. I say that about, accounting and legal. There are certain rules that we have to follow. But even there, that's why you have counterparties, and that's why you have people reviewing your work to make sure that if there are mistakes, that we catch them. So even there, as an accountant, sometimes my team brings me things and there are mistakes in them, and that's okay. That's why I reviewed it, is to find things like that.
Yeah, and catching mistakes is necessary. We all make them. Hopefully, we can try to figure out how to prevent repeating the mistakes. I'm more mindful of mistakes. I mean, they were all pretty minor. I've made at least 5 mistakes today that I could come up with off the top of my head. And one of them I admitted basically, to my boss and, a firm I work with as a subcontractor. And my willingness to admit that mistake was in part due to knowing I wasn't going to get chewed out. I wasn't going to be ridiculed. How could you do that? It was something where I was sloppy, but it was fixable.
Right.
Really no great harm. So I appreciate being able to work in an environment. When I'm in a leadership role, I'm with you. I try to create that environment as well.
Yeah, it's a powerful, that creating that kind of safety for people to be open is really important for them to reach their full potential.
Yeah. So speaking of you, Melanie, reaching your full potential, I was wondering if you could go back a little bit and fill in some of the gaps between, like you mentioned, high school dropout, business executive, CFO. Like, what?
How did that happen?
how did that happen? I mean, what got you on a good professional track?
Right. Yeah. So like many of us, like my childhood was a bit rocky. My parents divorced. Unfortunately, my father went bankrupt, and things just really didn't recover. And I ended up dropping out of high school by grade 10. I guess at that point, I just teenagers don't make good decisions often when they're on their own, and I was already out of my family house at that point. But within a couple of years, I really started realizing that this was not the good life for me. I'd gotten involved in drugs; things were not safe, and I just sort of woke up and realized that I could do better. And I was really fortunate to eventually get a job as a receptionist at an environmental engineering firm. So I was 20-ish years old, let's say, at that time, and fortunately, I was lucky enough to land in a work environment where there were really supportive leaders. And I had a leader who recognized my potential, and she also recognized my insecurity and how I was feeling, but she supported me and motivated me to go get a promotion from receptionist to admin assistant, and then just so far move up the ladder. And I also went back and got my GED. I did night school towards my bachelor, and then got my CPA designation. And all during that time, grew my career and went up the corporate ladder to get to where I am. So that's over 20 years career now to come from reception to CFO.
Well, that's great to hear. And as you're describing, having supportive leaders who helped you develop that potential instead of pigeonholing you as, well, Melanie can only do this because she has this background or she doesn't have a degree.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, and that is why, I do feel so passionate about the advocacy work that I'm doing around leadership, and having written this book is because I've seen so clearly from my own personal experience, and then also with people who have been on my teams who I've been able to support and help them sort of go outside of the box that they put themselves in. We really have so much power as leaders to make a difference in people's lives. And that can go both to the good and the bad, unfortunately.
Yeah. So we'll have a chance to talk about both sides of that, I guess. So I want to come back to the book. And again, the title is Detox: Managing Insecurity in the workplace, what inspired you? I'm busy with your career and executive role. I mean, what inspired you to put the time in, to write the book and bring it to everybody? Yeah.
Right. Well, certainly the exposure that I'd had to the power of positive leadership, and then later on in my career, like many of us, I did get in some work environments that were not as positive, and they were toxic. And I observed not only the reaction that had in me, but what that did to others, and how when we're in a work environment that isn't healthy, we shut down, we stop taking risks and moving outside of our comfort zone. Our ability to reach our full potential is limited. And then I also saw how we use defensive behaviors when we're in those kind of work environments that actually, work against building healthy relationships with our peers. So sometimes, really good people and people who could grow their career kind of got labeled as being problems, even though they were just reacting to what was happening in their environment. So I saw this enough. And then, honestly, the pandemic happened, and I am someone who would usually be out and about more in my life. And I couldn't do those things anymore. And so all these thoughts have been percolating in my head for quite a few years about work environments. And I started writing. And obviously I had quite a bit to say, because it turned into a book.
Yeah. Did you know it was going to be a book? Like, did it start off as maybe an article, and then you realized that there was more to say?
Yeah, it started out actually just as a bit of a, to be honest, a bit of a therapy exercise for myself, because I had been in some damaging work environments, and I was sort of working through my thoughts. But as I started writing, I realized, I did have a lot of ideas, and I had seen some really powerful, great things, as much as I'd seen good ones. So the book talks about the negative side of it, but I also provide, strategies around how to create that secure work environment where people can reach their full potential.
And before diving into a little bit more of the detail, I'm just curious, did you have a book coach or a mentor, somebody who was being supportive in this journey of writing a book?
I had a number of people in my life, interestingly, actually, one of the women who was really supportive of me earlier in my career, over 20 years ago, we've stayed friends, and she was very supportive. So she's been a mentor through my whole life, since I was 20 years old. And she supported me with this too. And I had a few other people in my life also who, when I told them how much I'd already written, they said, well, you should just keep going. But I didn't have a formal book coach, but I am really lucky to have built a supportive network overall, who got behind me and saw the power of what I was doing.
That's great. So back to the title of the book, the fact that insecurity comes up in the subtitle. We can think of, I've worked in toxic environments earlier in my career. I'm fortunate not to be in anything close to that now. We can think of some of the behaviors when you start saying, well, describe a toxic environment. There could be behaviors. Then is insecurity kind of the root to many of those behaviors? What do you think?
Well, so this is the theory that I came to over time was I just started noticing how much we were saying, oh, that person's insecure, or, they're just, they're lacking confidence, these kinds of things. I saw how much it came up. But we weren't often asking why. And then I really started realizing that when we don't feel safe, so when we're insecure, it does drive a lot of protective behaviors. And I think it is the root, because ultimately, as humans, our physical safety and psychological safety are both really important to us. And if we don't have them, we'll start instinctively using behaviors to protect ourselves. And just like how if we put our hand over a fire, we instinctively pull our hand away. If we're in an environment that is damaging or risk to our mental health, we'll start using defensive behaviors. So that is why I talk about it as insecurity, because I think it is that safety that drives, that need for safety that drives a lot of behaviors.
So if there's insecurity in an employee, it seems like the role of a leader is to try to develop them, to try to find ways to boost their confidence, even if that's not getting to the root of why they're insecure. What happens when it seems like we work under an insecure leader? That would be a much more challenging situation. What can we do?
Yeah, because I mean, the reality is all of us are insecure. Like if we're open and admit it, we all have something and that we're insecure about. Mm-hmm. So it's just a matter of degrees. And if you're in a toxic work environment, the insecurities that you already have become magnified. And in a leader, that will drive behaviors because if a leader is insecure themselves, they're less likely to be supportive of the growth of their team because they may even feel threatened by the people on their team. So that can be really detrimental to somebody's career growth.
And what are some of those other toxic behaviors that come to mind or that you write about in the book that are born out of insecurity?
Then there's a number of them. So passive aggressive is one that we all identify, and we don't always know that it is actually insecurity, but that is commonly what's driving it. Because if we feel insecure, we likely don't feel comfortable being direct. We don't feel safe being direct. So we use passive aggressive behaviors like dragging our feet or saying we support something, but actually not taking the actions to support it, or avoiding somebody or talking about something because we don't support it. And passive aggressive behavior, we all know that's very difficult to work with, and it can be detrimental to relationships in the workplace. So that is one really problematic one. I mentioned avoidance, procrastination. If we're insecure, we often procrastinate about tasks that we're afraid of, or the tasks that are a bit scary because we don't have the confidence to take them on. If you have an employee who's procrastinating constantly about something, you may wonder do they have the proper support and training to do that task? Or are they procrastinating because they actually think that doing it is just going to make them feel bad, even worse about themselves? And then, defensiveness is obviously very common as well.
So I love the way you stated that. Instead of just getting upset at the employee or blaming them or labeling like, oh, well, so-and-so is a procrastinator, asking why is such a helpful habit to sort of try to dig beneath the surface a little bit in a way then that can be helpful other than just saying, stop procrastinating.
Exactly, because it's not helpful, right? Like, and for most of us procrastinate and we don't know why we're doing it. In fact, sometimes we get frustrated at ourselves at why we're procrastinating about something, and usually there is some root there. And I do find often it's because something about the thing we're procrastinating about is scary to us. Maybe it is something we think we're going to fail at, and we don't think we can handle the failure. And that will be even more likely to happen if it's a toxic work environment where you have a leader who isn't supportive of you when you make mistakes. You're probably going to procrastinate even more about anything where you think there's a threat that you could do something wrong.
Yeah. And I think one other toxic behavior is the appearance of arrogance, or there's often a lot beneath the surface. And I think back to somebody I was working with 20 years ago, more at a peer level, and people would even say like, oh, well, so-and-so is really arrogant. Like just this outwardly, just kind of boastful manner in the workplace that could be off-putting to people. But this is someone I got to know well enough to understand that he was a teenage immigrant from Eastern Europe. Yeah. And his parents came to the US and brought him here when he was a kid. Didn't speak a lot of English, got picked on a lot for being different, unfortunately. And while some, the behaviors wasn't so bad as being toxic. It was at times just sort of noticeable or off-putting. I tried to be understanding of realizing like, well, this is born in some really, deep-rooted teenage trauma. I don't know. There was nothing we were going to do in the workplace that was really a personality trait.
Yeah. And I really do fundamentally believe that most of us are good. And whenever we are using behaviors like that and that sort of bravado, or it often is because of something that's happened to us earlier in our lives. And we've learned that behavior protects us. We don't want to show our weaknesses. So we use these kind of behaviors and most of the time it is because of, some sort of protective instinct or something that's happened to us earlier that's made us think that that's how we have to act. I mean, it's just like me talking about my mistake not sharing who I really am, right? I felt that was my protective instinct going, I'm not going to show this weakness that I didn't finish high school. And so it manifests in different ways in all of us, this need to protect.
Now, insecurity, and like you said, we all have it. Some aspect of ourselves or our career or to different degrees. I know it's not a binary, insecure, not insecure.
No.
But one thing I think people have talked about more in recent years is this idea of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
When someone has been successful but still has a lot of insecurity, what are your thoughts on that and what we can do as individuals or with others in a workplace to help them get past that?
Yeah, and that really is it's a challenging thing. And I think it's because in the work environment, sometimes we're actually even told to pretend we're something that we're not. Like I talk a bit about the fake it till you make it idea in my book. And I think I have a blog post about it too. And to me, like that is what creates imposter syndrome. We're actually often told to go into an environment and pretend to be something that we're not. And, for me, I did have imposter syndrome, but I created it for myself by actually hiding who I am. But as leaders, like we need to set the tone that employees don't have to do that they don't need to fake it till they make it, and we'll actually provide the support that they need. They don't need to fake it, because I do think imposter syndrome will manifest more strongly if you're in a workplace where you don't have the support. So you're actually just like you to a certain extent, you are being an imposter because you don't have the support and the training that you need. So you're having to pretend, and then that stays with you and makes you feel like you never deserve to be where you are. So providing people with good support and training that they need can help them feel like they do deserve to be there.
And I appreciate you mentioning, the systemic nature of this, of again, sort of come back to a similar idea. Don't criticize somebody or tell them don't feel like an imposter. We can help support them and build them up in different ways.
I agree.
I think some of that happens when, let's say, somebody gets a promotion early or at kind of a young age and then isn't supported. How many times do we see an individual contributor? I've seen it in different industries where someone gets promoted to a leadership role, isn't given really much guidance other than, well, you're smart, you'll figure it out. What can we do to help with that situation?
That is it. You keep on nailing some of the topics I have in my book, because another section is actually on over promotion, because I do think this is a massive issue, is that we very often put people into roles that they're not ready for. And that does create insecurities in them because they know they're not ready for it. And then, potentially they make more mistakes, they fail, it creates insecurities. They're often not given, it happens a lot in startups because, they don't have the funding to potentially hire experienced people. So people get put in these roles. And it's, often we think we're doing somebody a favor by giving them a promotion. But if we do that and we don't give them the right support, we can actually be saddling them with insecurities that can last for the rest of their career. So really making sure that people, I do recommend, like, sometimes it seems like it's a dirty word to talk about weaknesses now. Like but the reality is we all have them, and having an open discussion and figuring out how you can, if you put somebody in a role that maybe they aren't ready for, really identify where the areas are they'll need support and then give that to them. And that will reduce the chance that they'll get insecurities from being put in this challenging position.
Yeah. So talking about weaknesses beyond the cliche job interview question of, what's your
exactly.
Weakness?
Yeah. Right. What's your, which we all say, I do things too quickly, or, some of these, really getting into it. Because I know for me, actually, one of the more recent jobs that I went into, I actually went through the job description and I pointed out to them the areas where I felt that I didn't have the level of skill that they were looking for. And I think they were like, really like, what is this person doing? That she's supposed to be trying to sell herself. But what I wanted was to make sure that I went into that role feeling secure, knowing that they knew where I was going to need support, because that was more likely that I would stay confident in that role rather than me feeling like I was accepting it right off the bat, being a bit of an imposter because I wasn't honest about some of the areas that I didn't have strengths.
Yeah, but it's good that you applied for the position anyway. and went
Yes.
into the process. So it makes me think of, there are studies that show, as much as you can generalize about gender, that men are much more likely to apply for a position for which they don't have all the qualifications, more
Right.
so than women.
Yeah, I've seen that research as well. Yeah.
So do you find in your work and in your research, I mean, are there, again, there's danger sometimes in generalizing, but are there gender issues when it comes to facing insecurity or working through it?
Well, I've definitely seen it in my work experience. One thing I do find is women aren't as likely to boast and talk about some of the things that they've done, and sometimes don't value their experiences strongly. So that may be why we don't, as that research shown, a woman is less likely to apply for a job that she doesn't have all the skills for, rather than going, well, if I was able to do half of it, I must be able to figure out the other half. So sometimes women don't give themselves as much credit. That's just what I've seen in my work experience and in my own personal experience. It definitely has taken me time to build the confidence to believe that even though I can only do 75% of the job, I can probably figure out the other 25.
Yeah. So, Melanie, in your role as a CFO, the different companies where you've had that role, what do you and the rest of the C-suite do to guard against a toxic work environment even forming in the first place?
Yeah. Well, there's a few things. One, I mean, I talk a lot about transparency because I do think openness and transparency is a really critical piece. Of course, there's the don't be a bully. That is obvious, and so making sure that we look for values alignment in the leaders that we're bringing on the team. So that is the bar. Look for people that have values that align. But the thing is, even good people can create toxicity. So you do have to be intentional. And so for me, transparency is critically important, and that includes making sure expectations are clear so people don't become insecure because they don't know what is expected of them and they don't know if they're meeting those expectations. Make sure the strategy of the business is also really clear so people know where they're going and they know that their job is safe. And we talk about mistakes. I don't shy away from saying when I've made a mistake or what my weaknesses are. In fact, I'm pretty open with my weaknesses, and I hire people to make up for those. I'm a CFO. I am not an excellent financial modeler. So I have contracted somebody to do that work for me and let them know they have a skill set that I don't have. And that's how you build a team is being open about what will be the most complementary skills. And those are the areas where you're less strong.
Mm-hmm. So going back to an interesting phrase you used, good people can still create toxicity. That's thought-provoking, because I think a lot of times people might look at a leader and ascribe bad intent. I don't know who would be intentionally creating a toxic work environment. They might be
very few people.
They might be in denial about an environment being toxic.
Yes.
Probably more likely.
Yeah. That's definitely what I've seen. I've never in my career, even in the toxic work environments that I've been in, have been where somebody was intentionally doing so. Often it is driven by our own insecurities that make us, not share the information that we need to share, or some people are just better able to control their emotions than others. And if they don't get help and coaching to manage that, it can be really detrimental to the workplace.
Yeah. So maybe a final question for you. And again, our guest has been Melanie Pump. The book is Detox, Managing Insecurity in the Workplace. Why does this matter for business results? There's the human side of it. We don't want to make people miserable at work. We want them to be happy and reach their full potential. How is that then also good?
Yeah, great question. Because I am a CFO, so ultimately my mind works with numbers, and that is why I felt it was important for me to add my voice to this discussion, because people often just think, it's about the touchy feely stuff, but I do strongly believe that it affects the bottom line when you have a toxic work environment. And one critical piece is just productivity. If your team is distracted and afraid of being bullied or uncertain. So they're spending a lot of time worrying about whether they're meeting expectations or uncertain about what the expectations are of them. That's time that they could be spending on their work that they're not. We already talked about innovation. You want to you for your work, today in today's workplace, we need to be evolving and changing all the time. If you have people who are afraid of change, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of throwing out ideas, that's going to really limit the evolution of your business. So those are just a couple. Also collaboration. Collaboration is so important for businesses to be successful. And if people are in an environment where they're actually fearful of talking to their peers, they're going to avoid collaboration, and that's going to create silos within the organization, which is just really not healthy. And people won't reach their full potential, and neither will the business.
Yeah, and I think there are times when people who are not insecure can still be placed in a fear-driven workplace. If they're being pitted against their colleagues, well, that'll kill collaboration. If they're getting threatened for bad performance, if they're being blamed and punished and embarrassed for mistakes, people will cover things up. I mean, that'll trigger
insecurities, because the reality is that we all need our jobs in order to provide for our families and our livelihood. So if you start to feel that those things are at risk, that will create insecurity, and you will start to act defensively and use, many of the behaviors that we've talked about. So yeah, somebody who's otherwise, quite secure can come into a toxic work environment and become extremely insecure.
That's sad, and we don't want to see that.
It's exactly, and that is why I felt I wanted to write the book, because I saw it in people, and I saw it in myself, and I agree. It is sad. It's sad for the potential of the people and for business.
So how do you see people using the book? I imagine the one strategy we might not expect to work would be getting the book and coming to the boss and saying, hey, we need to detox our workplace. That might be too direct.
Yeah, it might be a bit. I mean, it depends on your relationship with your boss, of course. I have had some people tell me that that's what they're going to do. But one thing, and some of the most common feedback that I've had from people is reading the book has turned some lights on for them about their own behavior, or about people that they've maybe judged in the past, and so it's had a bit of a reset, an eye open on how they need to look at others, and so that is something. There's, of course, I have strategies in there around making it okay to make mistakes, and connecting with your employees and creating that positive environment. But in general, I really just hope it makes us look a little more closely when somebody is acting in a way that frustrates us. Before we judge them, think about, could there be something that's happening in the workplace that's driving that behavior, and recognizing that most of us want to do a good job. We really do. Yes. So we just need to create an environment where people can.
I haven't brought this show up in a while. I just watched the last episode of season 2. I don't know. Have you watched the show Ted Lasso?
I watched the first season. Yeah. I mean, many leadership lessons in Ted Lasso, unintentional ones, but yeah.
But you're making me think of, there's the famous darts scene in season 1 that's so powerful, where Ted Lasso, Coach Lasso quotes, I believe it's Walt Whitman, who says, be curious, not judgmental. And when you talk about what you're talking about, reminds me of that. And I think it's always a good reminder when you see certain workplace behaviors, be curious. I think that goes a long way.
I totally agree. Exactly. That is how we should approach it. Before we judge anything, try to understand the situation.
And I don't think this will be any great spoiler for you or others. I'll say it in a non-spoiler way. At the end of the last episode of season 2, there's a scene where Nate is demonstrating, he's being judgmental instead of curious. He's upset with Coach Lasso, and there's a lot of judgment that comes out. I do recommend season 2, though, for you, Melanie, and for others.
Check it out.
The entertainment and the lessons continue. Anyway, sorry to get sidetracked.
It's awesome. No, it's good. It's good. I'll check it out.
So again, our guest here today is Melanie Pump, and I hope the audience will go check out her book, Detox, Managing Insecurity in the Workplace. You can learn more. Her website is melaniepump.com, or you can go to melaniepump.com/book. I guess those are the right places to send people, Melanie.
Yeah. And then also you can check me out on LinkedIn. I do most things I post on LinkedIn as well.
Very good. Well, Melanie, congratulations on the launch of the book. Thank you for coming on here and sharing your reflections on your favorite mistake and getting past that, and the path to success and continued success by making sure we don't have toxic workplaces. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.